Hi, I'm Madison. And to them, I was never a daughter, I was the family's ATM. When their golden son-in-law gambled away everything they came for my inheritance, smiling like I owed it to them. But what they didn't know, that money had vanished from their reach 3 days before they knocked. So now I ask you, what do you do when the people who raised you are the ones who ruin you? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it for you? Drop a comment below, because this story, it starts with silence and ends with something none of them saw coming. The voicemail came in just after 7:30 that morning, right as I was wrapping up my third audit spreadsheet and eyeing the coffee pot for one last pour. "Hi, sweetheart." My mother's voice chirped through the speaker, all softness and sugar. "If you're free today, maybe stop by. Bring that folder, the one with the trust documents we talked about. No rush, of course, just whenever you can." She never called me sweetheart when she didn't want something. I stood still, phone in hand, staring out the window of my apartment. Early spring had hit Pennsylvania with its usual confusion, daffodils poking out of frost and wind that slapped like a reminder not to get too comfortable. That folder. I knew exactly what she meant. The living trust folder? Mine, not hers. But in our family, boundaries were just polite suggestions. By 10:15, I was parked in front of their house, the 2-story colonial I'd grown up in. I walked up the steps slowly, folder tucked into my bag like a secret. The front door creaked open before I even knocked. "There she is," Mom beamed, wrapping her arms around me with performative affection. "We're just finishing brunch. Come on in." Brunch. Of course. Not a text, not an invitation, just the assumption I'd show up. I stepped inside. Rachel, my older sister, barely glanced up from her mimosa. And there he was, Derek, the husband she treated like the second coming of Kennedy. He looked up from his plate of scrambled eggs and said, "Morning, Maddie." Only my ex-husband ever called me that. I pulled out a chair and sat down, trying not to react. Small talk filled the room like too much perfume. I nodded, smiled, let the words slide over me until... So Derek began casually placing his fork down. "I was thinking, think you could float us 75? I blinked. "What?" "Just 75 short term. It's for something I'm handling." Quietly, my mother leaned in. "It's a small ask, Madison. He's being very brave handling this on his own." My coffee turned bitter on my tongue. Rachel finally looked up. "You know Derek never asks for help. This is important." That old script again. My needs inconvenient. His wants urgent. I didn't speak. Not yet. I just placed my cup down and folded my hands in my lap. Mom smiled like the deal was done. "You've always been the reliable one. That's what we love about you." What they meant was I was the one who wouldn't say no. The one who didn't scream or cry or throw things. The one who never needed rescuing and so never got one. I stayed for another 15 minutes, barely speaking, nodding when expected. I said I had a work deadline, a client call. I lied, of course. Back home, I pulled the folder from my bag and placed it gently on my kitchen counter. The trust I'd built from my own savings quietly over the years. It wasn't enormous, but it was enough. And it was entirely mine. I stared at it for a long time. I remembered the last time I said no when I refused to co-sign for Rachel's second boutique expansion. Mom didn't speak to me for 4 months. Told everyone I was going through something. This wasn't new. I'd been the fallback plan since I was 10, but not anymore. I clicked open the encrypted file, something no one knew I'd locked with a rotating passkey, and began typing commands. Slowly, precisely. Then I whispered more to myself than anyone too late. I didn't move everything. Just enough. Enough to send a message if anyone tried to help themselves over the weekend. As the last window closed on my screen, I sat back watching the digital confirmation blink once. Then silence. They thought I was the ATM, but the account was already closed. By the time the coffee had gone cold on my desk, the air in my home office felt too still. I didn't realize how long I'd been staring at the closed folder, the one I'd encrypted the night before. I got up, stretched my back, and moved to the kitchen. The silence followed me. No music, no TV, just that heavy kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I poured myself another cup and walked back into the office where my phone buzzed on cue. Voicemail, again. It was the same message from yesterday, the same saccharine tone buried beneath a pile of manipulation. I tapped play. Hey, sweetheart. Just wanted to check in. I know you always keep great records. Your sister and Derek could really use your precision right now. I told them Madison is so organized she could find a penny in a tornado. Anyway, maybe you could bring that folder. No rush, but soon would be ideal. Love you. The words clung like syrup on steel, sticky and sharp at the same time. Use your precision. Not help, not support. Use. I tapped rewind. Could really use your precision. Again. Use your precision. I hit pause. There it was. The core of it. Not a daughter, not a sister, a resource. A human calculator. I let out a breath, sat back down, and opened the file drawer beside me. The manila folder was still there, labeled 2005 College Fund Transfer. I hadn't touched it in years, but I remembered every page inside. I flipped it open. That was the first time they'd lost my money. I was 17. I had spent 2 years working weekends at the grocery store. Every dollar, every tip bagged and tucked away. I had saved $18,000 by the time I graduated. I gave it to them to hold for my college tuition. They said it would be safer in their account. By fall, it was gone. Emergency repairs, Dad said. Medical costs, Mom added. The furnace worked fine. No one was sick. So I majored in finance. Not because I wanted to get rich, but because I never wanted to be lied to again and not know it. That afternoon, I opened the email Derek's assistant had forwarded me by accident. She had CC'd me while sending Derek the firm's quarterly review. She must have thought I was still involved in the audit loop. I wasn't not, since he insisted I step back for optics. Still, I opened the file. Page 2, line 38. A $3,700 wire to the Bellagio Hotel and Casino dated 6 weeks ago, labeled Client Outreach. Client outreach my ass. I highlighted it, printed it. Then I leaned back and just sat. Because even with that page in my hands, even knowing exactly what he did with it, I still had a gut-level hesitation. Wasn't this what family did? Caught each other, cleaned up quietly? That's what Mom always said. That family wasn't tit for tat. That we weren't supposed to keep score. But then why did I always feel like I was the only one paying? I closed the file, then opened a separate panel on my monitor, the Trust Vault. My Trust Vault hidden behind dual encryption biometrics and a separate physical key. It had taken me 4 years to build and only 30 minutes to restructure last Tuesday. I hadn't known what was coming, but something in my bones told me to prepare. I scrolled through the files, all secure, all notarized. No duplicate beneficiaries, no silent cosigners, no oops, we thought this was joint. Just me. I printed 1 page. Just one. It was the Bellagio wire with Derek's signature on the approval line. I took a yellow sticky note and scribbled 5 words. You taught me numbers don't lie. I paused, then added, neither do wire transfers. I placed the note on the page and slid both into an envelope. Unsealed. Then I sat there for a long while, watching the light shift on my office floor. I didn't press send. Not yet. First, I needed to see how far they'd go. Instead, I closed the laptop, got up from my desk, and walked to the kitchen more out of instinct than hunger. I rinsed out my coffee mug, set it on the drying rack, then stood there motionless, with my hands still wet. They didn't just want help. They expected it. Again. I stayed quiet through Saturday night, barely sleeping, just thinking. Replaying the last few months like a movie I hadn't realized I was in until the 3rd act. And now it was Sunday. By 9:30 a.m., I was parked outside the small white church my parents had attended for years. I didn't go in. I just waited. At 11:02, the church doors opened, and I watched from my car as my mother emerged in her pale blue coat, all pearls and polish. My father followed behind, shaking hands, putting on that practiced half-smile he reserved for public settings. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Mom, want to come over for coffee and pie, just the three of us." "No pressure. Just the three of us." "Right." Still, I replied with a simple sure. By 11:30, I was standing in the doorway of the home I grew up in, holding my purse in both hands. The front room looked almost exactly as it had when I left for college, minus the updated curtains and the glaring sense of arrangement. The coffee was already poured. "Hi, sweetheart," my mom said, too cheerful, like someone trying to hide a stain on a white shirt. "I made your favorite pecan pie. You still love it, don't you?" My dad gestured stiffly toward the living room. "Come, sit down. Let's relax. It's been too long." They weren't angry. They weren't defensive. They were polite. Too polite. And Derek nowhere in sight. I sat on the edge of the armchair, back straight jacket still on. We were hoping my mother began easing into the couch like it was all casual we could talk to you. Not about Derek specifically, but about everything. The bigger picture. I said nothing. She reached into the drawer of the hallway buffet and pulled out a navy blue binder. She placed it delicately on the coffee table and slid it toward me like it was a peace offering. Across the front in gold foil were the words, "Emergency Liquidity Plan." I let out a soft, incredulous breath. "You labeled it." "It's about family," she said quickly, folding her hands. "About preserving what we've built. This home, your father's name, the future of your sister's career. We didn't want to come to you without a plan." I opened the binder with 2 fingers. Neatly tabbed sections, a printed timeline, proposed loan amounts, expected contributions, financial forecasts written in a tone that pretended to be professional, but couldn't hide the desperation. And then I saw it. Page 6. A line item labeled Collateral Property, 3rd Street Residence, Signatory Madison R. Garrison, notarized February. I blinked. I hadn't signed any property agreements, let alone in February. "Where did you get these forms?" I asked, keeping my voice even, flipping the page with deliberate calm. My father cleared his throat. "We thought since you'd been helping Derek with taxes that it made sense to get ahead of it. To move things into a structure that made legal sense." I tilted my head. "So you forged my name?" "No," my mother said quickly, face reddening. "It's not like that. Your signature? Well, your father remembered seeing one from a few years ago, and Derek's assistant helped." "That's a felony," I said softly, eyes still on the page. "You do know that, right?" They went quiet. "You thought I'd play along if it looked like I'd already agreed. Like this was a formality. A cleanup." My mom's voice dropped an octave. "We didn't mean harm. You've always been so precise, so good with this kind of thing. Good enough to notice when someone weaponizes my own records against me?" I replied, finally closing the binder. There was silence, not heavy hollow. I stood slowly. "Do you want me to keep pretending this is pie? Or do we want to talk about fraud?" My father looked like he wanted to vanish. My mother's hands shook just slightly as she gathered the plates and napkins still unused from the tray beside her. I excused myself to the restroom, and once inside, I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at myself. The mirror showed a face calm enough to fake composure, but I felt the tremble in my fingers, the sting behind my eyes. "They didn't even ask," I whispered to the reflection. "They planned this months ago. Not once had they called. Not once had they sent a message asking for help before crossing that line. They had just assumed, because that's what I'd always done. Helped without question. Smiled while sacrificing. Nodded even when the weight landed squarely on me. I washed my hands, not because they needed it, but because I did. I returned to the living room without expression. My purse was still on the armchair. I reached inside, pulled out a small silver flash drive, and held it out to my mother. "What's this?" she asked, voice cautious. "It's a backup of your emergency plan," I said calmly, "just in case the binder gets misplaced." She took it with a hesitant nod, clearly unsure what to make of it. I gave her one last glance, a quiet, unreadable smile, and walked toward the front door. No yelling, no confrontation, just a passing of evidence. As I reached the porch, the wind caught the door as I pulled it shut behind me. I walked down the path toward my car with the binder image still vivid in my mind. Halfway to the curb, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Blocked number. I answered mostly out of reflex. The voice on the line said 4 words, calm, clipped, and unmistakable. "We need to talk. Now." And I froze. I paused before unlocking my car, the autumn sun slipping low behind the trees lining my parents' street. The screen glowed with a single word, blocked. I hesitated, but something inside nudged me. Curiosity, instinct, or maybe just weariness. I answered. "Miss Garrison?" The voice began calm, assured, almost friendly. "We represent an interested party in your family's financial structure, specifically the Garrison Living Trust." I didn't reply. Not yet. My other hand tightened around my keys. "I'd like to propose a path forward," he continued, as if we were old colleagues discussing a business deal over golf. "One that doesn't involve court filings or headlines." He knew too much. The trust's legal name, its structure. My silence stretched, but he didn't fill it with uncertainty. He filled it with leverage. "There's still a way to protect the legacy your parents worked so hard to build," he added. "And it's not just your family depending on this. There are others who stand to lose if this turns adversarial." My stomach clenched. That shift from your family to others was deliberate. This wasn't just a call from a lawyer trying to clean up a family mess. This was pressure masked, polished, but pressure all the same. "You don't need to make any decisions right now," the voice said, still syrup smooth. "Just know we'd prefer resolution over escalation." And then the call ended. No name, no callback number. I sat frozen in my seat for a moment. The quiet inside the car was suffocating. The warmth from earlier, the false piece of pie and fake smiles, was gone. I drove back toward my apartment, the voice replaying in my head on a loop. Not just my parents, others? Who else was tangled in this? Who had something to gain or lose from my silence? I didn't turn the lights on when I stepped inside. I dropped my purse near the door and headed straight for the laptop I hadn't touched in weeks. I logged into the public court portal, cross-searched Derek's name with known filings, business licenses, real estate lines. Then I narrowed it further, anyone he'd listed as a business partner in the last 5 years. And there it was. Frederick Jonas, indicted 2 years ago in a multi-state money laundering investigation. Real estate fronts fake charities vanished overseas mid-trial. Still listed as at large. And right there in an old LLC registration, Derek's name. Secondary partner. That voice on the line, probably not a lawyer. Not really. A handler maybe. A fixer. Someone used to pulling strings behind the scenes, while people like me were meant to fold quietly and smile. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For a second, the weight of it all threatened to flatten me. My parents hadn't just lied to me. They'd tied themselves to something far uglier than gambling. And I'd been the insurance. The silence in my apartment felt hollow. I stood, walked the room once, twice, then pulled out my phone and played the voicemail again. This time, I listened without emotion, just detail. Intonation, phrasing. Every word measured, tested, calculated. I opened my contacts and selected one. Jenna Barlow. We hadn't spoken in months. She worked at the DA's office now. White-collar crimes division. She'd know what to do if I disappeared. I attached the voicemail and typed one line, just in case anything happens to me. I didn't hit send. Not yet. But I left the message open, visible on the screen. Then I opened the metal lockbox I hadn't touched in years. Inside, flash drives, receipts, notarized copies, overlays of signatures my mother insisted I'd signed, but hadn't. Bank transfers tied to accounts I'd never opened. Backup after backup. Some were things I'd forgotten I'd kept, but my instincts even back then had been whispering. Prepare. Protect. I pulled the files out and began scanning them into a folder on my encrypted drive. I didn't name it anything cute. I labeled it what it was, implosion if forced. Then I opened a blank document and began outlining the timeline. Not for court. Not yet. Just to remind myself I wasn't crazy. This was real. This happened. They did this. I worked in silence for over an hour, pausing only when the sky outside darkened and rain began tapping against the window. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I didn't need brightness. I needed clarity. My eyes landed on the flash drive I'd handed my mother earlier, the decoy. Enough truth to distract her. Enough bait to see who else was watching. I whispered to the room, to the shadows, maybe even to the family I'd once loved. They should have known. I don't bluff. I reached over and locked my screen. Stood stretched, walked to the kitchen for water. The weight in my chest had changed. Not lifted, but steadied. Like I'd shifted from drowning to swimming. But before I could take a sip, my phone lit up again. This time it was my sister. The moment I hit lock, my phone lit up again. My sister's name glowing in the dark, like it had something to say for itself. I let it ring twice before answering, not because I was unsure, but because I needed the extra breath. Hey, sis. Rachel's voice was like honey warmed on the stove. Smooth, deliberate. I just heard everything. I mean, I had no idea Mom and Dad were putting you through all this. You should have said something sooner. I leaned my head back against the headrest, watching the sky darken through the windshield. That voice, too polished, too careful. She was trying to play the middle woman, the peacekeeper. But I heard it, that slight flutter behind her words. Fear disguised as kindness. She kept going. Look, I know they're being harsh, but I swear I didn't know about the trust stuff until way after. The words dripped through the speaker, each one clinging to its excuse. I didn't interrupt. I'd learned a long time ago that Rachel filled silence with truth she didn't mean to share. And right on cue, she slipped. And if Paul had called me first, I would have told him to back off. I blinked, sat upright. Who, I asked, voice steady. There was a pause on her end, a beat too long. I just assumed that was the guy who, called you, she said too quickly. I hadn't told anyone the name. Not a soul. And I certainly hadn't told her. The man who'd called yesterday never introduced himself beyond representing an interested party. But she'd named him. Paul. The rest of the conversation blurred. She backtracked, asked about my weekend, tossed in a half-hearted, "We should catch up soon." I gave her nothing in return but vague noise. Then I ended the call and stared into the night. It wasn't just the call. This had roots. I sat in the car until my legs stiffened, memories sliding in like old film reels. Freshman year high school. We'd both said we wanted to apply to the same college, the one with the amazing architecture program and the outdoor art museum. I submitted my essay early, even got a private interview set up. But when it came time to schedule mine, the office said, "We've already spoken with Rachel Garrison." She'd gone behind my back, took my talking points, showed up the day before, and never told me. When I confronted her, she blinked like I was crazy. "Oh, I thought we agreed you didn't want to go after all." She'd always had that gift, the art of playing dumb while planting every trap. Now she was back at it. This time using strangers with legal threats and veiled pressure. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the moon was high and the sidewalks empty. I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I walked to the corner past the mailbox and looped around the building. I needed to feel my feet on the pavement, ground myself before I did what I knew I had to. I stepped into my apartment and flicked on the lamp. No music, no TV, just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of me thinking. I opened the cabinet over the printer and pulled out a manila envelope. Slid in a sheet of paper with one line written in thick black Sharpie. If I get another call, this goes to the state attorney and Channel 5. I tucked in a copy of the call transcript screenshots, even the clipped headline about Derek's old business partner, the one now barred from operating in 3 states. I sealed it, wrote her name on the front. Rachel Garrison. The drive to her place was short, less than 10 minutes. The sky had that flat, empty look of a night not yet ready for stars. She answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, like she'd been baking cookies and not pulling puppet strings. "Oh, hey." I didn't step in. I just wanted to drop this off. I handed her the envelope. She looked down. "What is this?" "Insurance." She opened the flap, pulled the first page halfway out, then stopped. Her jaw tightened. The corners of her mouth pulled flat. "I'm not playing, Rachel," I said, quiet but firm. "You do anything behind my back again, and this doesn't stay between us." She looked up, her face suddenly more fragile than fake. And for once, she didn't deny it. "You've always had everything," she whispered. "They look at you like you're the only one that mattered. You were the golden one. I wanted to matter too." There was something soft in her tone. A kind of child buried under years of resentment. But I didn't reach for it. "I would have shared anything if you'd just asked," I said. "But you made it a war." She didn't respond. I turned, walked down her porch steps. My fingers brushed the iron railing, cold from the night air. As I reached my car, I scrolled through my contacts, paused at her name, then hit delete. Simple, final. No goodbye, no second chances. Family who lies to you isn't family. It's just coincidence with matching birth certificates. By the time I got home, I was ready to sink into sleep. But just as I kicked off my shoes, my phone buzzed again. Subject line: urgent distribution motion filed. The words blinked in my mind like hazard lights. I set the keys down, pulled my laptop toward me, and opened the email with both hands. My name was there right under a forged signature. I read the first paragraph once, then twice, then a third time, just to be sure my brain hadn't invented it out of exhaustion. The language was twisted careful. Whoever drafted it knew how to walk the legal line while stabbing someone in the back. They were claiming I was withholding shared family assets, saying my sole access to restricted accounts was putting unnamed dependents at risk during a time of mental and medical crisis. As if I was the one barricading the door and leaving people out in the cold. But what made my stomach turn was the PDF attached, a scanned form filed with the court. With my name. And a signature that looked just close enough to pass if no one looked too hard. I didn't sit down. I called Lynette right away. She picked up on the second ring, voice scratchy with sleep. "Madison." I didn't waste a breath. They filed something in my name. Emergency distribution motion? The signature's fake. There was silence, then the rustle of sheets and a groan. "Email it to me right now." While I hit forward, I heard her mutter under her breath. These people really don't know who they're playing with. I leaned against the counter. "They're trying to force my hand, aren't they? They think you'll fold, that you won't want this going public?" she said flatly. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Then they're about to learn something else. I like things neat, but if it gets messy, I prefer it televised. By 8:01 the next morning, I was outside the courthouse, heels clicking across the concrete file folder pressed tight against my chest. Not trembling, not angry, just ready. Lynette met me at the main doors, blazer-sharp coffee in hand, no small talk. "Let's hit them where it hurts." Inside, we submitted a counter motion. Proof of forgery. Digital timestamps from my device logs, and a request for an immediate injunction. Lynette added a final touch, a list of witnesses who could attest to the real timeline of the family trust setup. People outside the family. Names I'd kept quiet for a reason. Until now. As we stepped into the hallway heading toward the elevator, I caught sight of them. My parents. They hadn't seen me yet. My father stood stiff, jaw-tight arms folded across his chest. My mother was in one of her pale silk blouses, one she only wore for funerals or photo ops. They looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just stopped seeing them through the filter of hope. When they noticed me, Dad stepped forward. "You're really going to do this?" I didn't stop walking. "Air all this like laundry," he added, quieter. I met his eyes, still walking. "No, Dad. You dragged it out here. I'm just holding up a mirror." My mother hissed, one hand clutching her pearls like they were some kind of moral armor. "You think this makes you righteous?" I turned calm as a lake. "No, just legal." The courtroom was colder than the hallway. Or maybe that was just me. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for no-nonsense hearings, scanned both motions. Her fingers tapped the desk twice before she spoke. "Pending full investigation into the validity of this signature and motion origin, I am freezing all actions related to the Garrison Family Trust. Effective immediately. No distributions, no asset transfers." She looked up. "And Miss Garrison, your response was thorough. Appreciate it." I nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." Lynette gave my wrist a light squeeze as we gathered our things. The smallest sign of victory. And yet all I felt was the weight of it. Heavy, unyielding. Outside the courthouse, the sun was warm, but I didn't feel it. I got home sometime afternoon after a long meeting with Lynette's paralegal, who made certified copies of every document and filed an additional notice for fraud alert with the state's probate registrar. The rest of the afternoon blurred. Emails, scanning receipts, checking timestamps, forwarding witness statements. I moved like someone cleaning up after a flood, mechanically, precisely, without pause. It wasn't until well after sunset that I sat down on my small balcony. I didn't bring wine. No playlist humming in the background. Just me, a mug of plain water, and the city lights blinking in the distance. I didn't cry. There were no sobs or clenched fists. But somewhere beneath my ribs, something ached. Like a quiet mourning. Not for the money, not even for the documents, but for something deeper I had been trying not to name. The illusion. The one I'd clung to for years, that maybe if I did everything right, I'd still be part of something solid. Something that held me. A family. But what kind of family forges your name on court papers just to bleed you dry? What kind of parents gamble your silence like currency? I let the night wrap around me like a sheet of glass. Cool, fragile. And for the first time, I accepted what had been true for years. These people were never my safety net, just a tightrope, one I'd stopped balancing on. I stood stretched and headed back inside just as my laptop chimed again. New email, not court-related. Subject line, "Are you the whistleblower?" Sender name, withheld. But the domain, it belonged to a journalist I'd read for years. Someone who didn't waste time with gossip. Investigative. Relentless. There was an attachment. Just one. A cropped image of a loan document redacted in parts, but the margins, font, and headers were unmistakable. It was from the stash I'd secured months ago. The page number, the embossed stamp, I knew them by heart. This hadn't come from the courthouse. Someone had leaked it. I sat back slowly, staring at my laptop like it might blink first. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Click. The body of the email was short, direct. "Ms. Garrison, if this was your signature, you might be in trouble. If it wasn't, I think your family is." No greeting, no fluff, just an open door with a question waiting on the other side. I didn't write back. I called. But not before I'd downloaded the voice modulation app Lynette had mentioned in passing weeks ago, half joking, half serious after a long meeting when I said, "If they keep this up, I'll be wearing wigs and using burner phones." Now, here I was, tapping the disguise button and hitting call. It rang twice. "Hello." A woman's voice, steady, professional. The kind of voice that had cornered CEOs and crooked board members. I didn't give my name. "I saw your message," I said, pitched lower, the words clipped. She paused. So you are connected to the Garrison filings? I'm calling to say nothing. Which is a kind of something, she replied calmly. I'm not here to out anyone. I'm here to understand if what I'm seeing is family dysfunction or criminal enterprise. I let silence stretch between us. Let her sit with it. Then I said only one word. Both. Click. I ended the call. But even after I shut the laptop, my heart didn't stop racing. I knew how that page got out. There was only one possibility. One file, one envelope. From the afternoon, I sat in my kitchen 3 weeks ago, scanning documents while my tea went cold, and Rachel's engagement post played in the background on silent. Back then, I didn't even know what I was preparing for. Just something. I called it my if I go missing packet. It wasn't a joke. I sent one copy, one sealed thumb drive to my godmother Joan. Joan, who spent 3 decades with the IRS. Who always brought legal pads to Thanksgiving. Who hugged like she was measuring the weight of your secrets. She never acknowledged it, never called. But I wasn't surprised. Now I wondered if someone in her orbit, someone watching these filings, had seen something that didn't sit right and quietly escalated it. Quietly. Until now. That brought me back to a different question. What was I supposed to do now? The urge to go public itched at me. Scratch the surface, make the whole web unravel. But I called Lynette instead. Put her on speaker as I leaned against the sink, staring out at the dim apartment courtyard below. She didn't hesitate. If this leaks to national press before we're ready, they'll drag it into sentiment. You'll be the estranged daughter again. They'll play it like I'm unstable, lonely, jealous, I finished, and broke. She sighed. They'll muddy it. Right now it's clean, tidy, documented, yours. I said nothing. Just listened to her voice. The one steady presence in this whole ordeal. Timing is leverage, Madison, she said gently. Wait. After we hung up, I stood still for a long while. Eventually, I poured a glass of water, turned off the overhead lights, walked barefoot onto the balcony. The city hummed around me. A dog barked once. A bus coughed up the block. Inside, my phone buzzed. One last text before I'd planned to call it a night. No name, no contact, just 6 words. Back off, or we'll show them who you really are. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, thumb resting near the edge, and I smiled. You think I've been hiding? I whispered into the dark. You haven't met the worst part of me yet. The morning sunlight was just beginning to filter through the blinds when the buzz from my phone sliced through the stillness. I was in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil my hand halfway to the sugar jar, when the screen lit up. Bank alert, suspicious activity detected. Withdrawal request $183,500, pending approval. For a second, I thought it was a scam. But the bank's name was real. The account number looked vaguely familiar, like an old song you couldn't quite place. I sat down, opened the app, and froze. It was an emergency fund I'd opened in college, a tiny account I'd used for car repairs and textbooks. I hadn't touched it in years. I didn't even remember if I'd ever formally closed it. But someone else had found it and tried to drain it. I canceled the withdrawal with one tap. But the damage wasn't just in numbers. It was in the name I saw listed under co-access permissions. Derek Harwood. I blinked. Closed the app, reopened it. But there it was, like a ghost from a chapter I thought I'd burned. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just grabbed my keys and a jacket slid into my shoes and drove straight to the bank. The branch manager, a woman named Carla, took me into a small, glass-walled office. She listened carefully, then nodded toward the monitor. Someone logged in from an IP address based out of Nevada, she said. A rental property. We traced the name associated with the device, Derek Harwood. She leaned back, cautious. He was added as a joint account manager on this over 9 years ago. You never removed him. My throat tightened. I never added him in the first place. Carla didn't speak for a moment. Then she turned the screen slightly so I could see. Old authorization forms. Scanned, blurry, faded. But one of the signatures supposedly mine jumped out. Because it wasn't mine. Not even close. It was a forgery. An ugly one. She looked at me concerned. Would you like us to start a fraud claim? I nodded. My lips felt stiff. Please do. And send me a copy of every document tied to that account. Every login, every IP. On the drive home, I didn't even turn the radio on. Just the sound of tires on pavement. My hands gripped the wheel like I was keeping something from flying off the edge. Derek. 10 years ago, Rachel had pulled me into the kitchen with our parents and said Derek just needs a fresh start. He's clean now. You co-signed the account, it gives him a chance to build credit again. Family helps family, right? I had said no, point blank, not with my name. Dad called me cold, said I was heartless like your mother's side. Mom cried about how he'd always been a good boy underneath. Rachel. She just smiled, like she already knew how this would end. And now I did too. They forged my name, added Derek without my consent, and left the account untouched like a landmine, buried and waiting for the right moment to explode. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't neglect. It was strategy. By the time I got home, the kettle I'd left had long since gone cold. I didn't even bother reheating it. I opened my laptop, sent a single email to someone I hadn't contacted in years, an old friend from undergrad, who now did digital forensic consulting for insurance fraud. I attached the scanned account forms, the IP logs, screenshots of the app activity, even old texts from Rachel that suddenly made more sense now. My note was short. Can you build a visual? I need to show how it all connects. Not just on paper, but publicly. By sunset, my living room had transformed. The corkboard I had once used for photos was now covered in printed emails, sticky notes, arrows pinned between names. My name Madison was at the center. Surrounding it were nodes. Rachel, Derek, Mom, Dad, 2013 loan, Nevada property, digital signature date, every string tied together like veins in a body. But the body wasn't alive. It was a system, a fraud engine. I stood back, arms crossed, studying it. There was no more denial. No more room for maybe they didn't know. They knew. They built this. I picked up a red card, wrote 6 words, and pinned it dead center at the top of the board. If they wanted war, they should have packed smarter. I was halfway to turning off the lamp when the doorbell rang. Not urgent, not impatient, just one ring. I walked over, slowly looked through the peephole. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the press. It was my father. He wasn't holding flowers or apologies, just his hat in his hand. I didn't move right away. The doorbell echoed once more. I could have pretended I wasn't home. Just stayed behind the wall, breathing quietly. But some part of me wanted to know. Wanted to look him in the eye. I opened the door. There he was. My father. He looked older than I remembered, like time hadn't been kind. Or maybe had just stopped pretending. His shoulders slumped slightly, not in defeat, but in fatigue. Like life had pulled the fight out of him, but left the pride behind. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice dry. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just stepped to the side, barely enough for him to pass. He walked in like he still lived there. I closed the door gently, then leaned against it, arms crossed. He stood in the middle of my apartment, taking in the corkboard. The red strings, the photographs. His eyes lingered on his own name, pinned beneath a small note, initial transfer, April 2017. "So it's true," he muttered. I didn't answer. He sat down on the edge of my sofa, rubbing his hands together like he was working up to something. I didn't offer him water or time. He cleared his throat. Derek is gone. Rachel's barely holding it together. She thought posting on social media would help, but it's only making things worse. There's talk of an audit now. And the house. We could lose it. I stayed where I was. He looked up at me, then eyes red-rimmed. Not quite teary, just strained. "You're the only one who can fix this," he said softly. I tilted my head. "Funny. That's what you said when you asked me to co-sign his lease. When you said I should be a team player. When Rachel needed my name to get approved for those grants." He didn't flinch. Just said again, firmer, like it could override memory, "You're the only one." I walked slowly over to the kitchen counter and leaned on it, facing him across the room. "I was never broken," I said. That made him blink. He sat up straighter, like trying to decide if I meant it or was just being difficult. "You don't understand what we were dealing with," he said, his voice hardening. "We did what we had to." "You forged my name," I interrupted. "You made me legally responsible for debt I didn't create. You called it helping family. But let's not pretend you didn't know what you were doing." He stood. We were trying to keep things afloat, and I was the lifeboat I asked. Is that what I've always been? The silence between us thickened. I looked away, and for the briefest moment, my mind slipped back. I was 19 again, home from school for the weekend, walking down the hallway at night and stopping when I heard laughter from the living room. My mother, my father Rachel, she should be grateful we even gave her anything. Most girls like her don't get that. I'd stood there barefoot on the carpet, holding a glass of water that felt heavier with every second. That was the first time I realized I wasn't their daughter. I was their utility. The memory passed like a breeze through a cracked window. I turned back toward him. "You want the truth?" I said, voice low. I was the ATM, the backup plan. The one who paid stayed silent and smiled. But I'm not smiling anymore. He opened his mouth, probably to summon guilt, to twist history into obligation. But I held up a hand. "I'd rather be alone," I said, "than indebted to liars and blood ties." We stood in that stillness. Nothing moved. Not the air, not the clock. Then I walked to the dining table and picked up the envelope I'd set out earlier. I handed it to him without ceremony. He looked down at it. "What is this?" Copies of the forged documents, metadata, timestamps, and a little note to the DA I never sent. His eyes darted back to me. "You're threatening your own family." "No," I said plainly. "I'm setting a boundary. You can walk away now quietly, or everything in that folder becomes public record." He held the envelope like it was burning his fingers. We stood there, neither of us blinking. Finally, he turned for the door. I followed, not close, but close enough to make sure the latch clicked behind him. When it did, it sounded less like a slam and more like a sigh. I stood there alone, still. The apartment was quiet. No voices, no spinning lies. Just me and a wall of names and arrows and truth. But I didn't look at the board. I looked at my own reflection in the glass. Not bitter, not broken, just done. Sometimes the only thing you need to inherit is peace.